Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the Saint Lucia Development Bank was being revamped or was being reorganized because the bank had merged into the National Bank, I came to this Honorable House, and the Minister of Finance, when he raised the bill, I said to him that we had issues with going back into a development bank, but if it was his policy, we would have supported his policy, and it was his policy, so he had a right to go with it. And the bank was, we actually voted for it, and the bank was put into life. But the bank has suffered from one problem, Mr. Speaker. It's always been undercapitalized, in that we need investment in the equity of that bank, and that is the problem with the Saint Lucia Development Bank. And that is the problem, that's the issue I was raising at the time in opposition, that the bank needed to be properly capitalized. So right now, I find ourselves in a situation where the bank may have customers, the bank may want money for on-lending, but it hasn't got the sources, it hasn't got the equity, so it has to borrow. The bank has shown very slight improvements between 2012 and 2013. The asset base has increased, but it still makes losses, albeit a little smaller losses, $100,000 less than last year. So the bank needs equity. For some reason, we can't find necessary equity, so we are borrowing loans. Now, the Minister of Finance says that only what the government is doing is guaranteeing the loan. The government is contingently liable to the NIC for the loan. So in effect, the government is borrowing from the NIC indirectly, because it's contingently liable for the loan. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to inform you and the Honorable House of the situation, the financial situation that the government has with the NIC at this point. And I will speak a little about the NIC generally as an organization and the issues that we have to look at when it comes to the NIC. Only recently, the NIC had to bail out the government from defaulting on a bond payment. All sorts of excuses were made for that reason. The government said it was only a cash flow problem, because they could not pay down on the bond. And the government did not want to default, because the government knew the consequences of defaulting on the bond, which is not a good thing to do. So the government decided to borrow money from the NIC to pay down on that, to pay up that bond. And then, when the documents, or when the information came to the public, the government, as usual, had an onslaught on the people who disclosed the information, or on the opposition, because we asked some questions. And it was said, Mr. Speaker, that the NIC has a lot of money. Mr. Speaker, the NIC is not an organization for today. It's not an organization for us inside of here. It's an organization for the future. And I want to say categorically in this Honorable House today, Mr. Speaker, that the NIC, even if at the moment it may seem to have a lot of money, the NIC needs serious reform. If the NIC needs serious reform, if people will be able to draw their pensions in 32 years' time. Because the projections show that by 2050, If there are no changes in what the NIC is doing, and that comes from the accrual report, and I would wish that in the future, the accrual report is made a document of the House, when the other one is done in 2020. It says, I said I would wish it would be. So you join now. If I said I wish it would be, because the last one is 2015, I'm saying in future it should be made a document of the House, because it has some very serious implications for the future of the NIC and the future of Saint Lucia. And any government will have to take some serious measures to ensure that the viability of the NIC. The NIC will run short of money by the year 2050 if measures are not taken. 2050, that's what I said. 2050, 32 years from now, if measures are not taken if some corrective measures are not taken now. And when these corrective measures are taken, this is why we have to think seriously about how we use the resources of the NIC, even if the NIC may appear to have a lot of money now. It's not really a lot of money if you look into the future and where the population trends in this country are going. And you must also note that the NIC is a relatively young institution. It's relatively young. So, again, we have to exercise caution on the way and where we invest the NIC's money. We have to exercise caution where we invest it. We have to exercise caution because right now the government already has, as we speak, the government has loans and advances from the NIC, loans in 2017 of $70 million, which increased. It was $44 million in 2016. In 2017, it is $70 million. And other advances from the government, $68 million, increasing from $54 million last year. And a provision for these loans has already been made. A provision of $35 million for impairment has already been made on these loans. This is why the figure is $70 million. Originally, it was $105 million. So the NIC is holding a substantial amount of government paper, and the whole viability of the NIC in the future would depend on the actions that we take now. So whereas it may seem very easy for $20 million to be borrowed to the Saint Lucia Development Bank, which may be put into good use, I'd be happy if I would know what is the spread of that money. I'll be gratified if I get to know how that money is being borrowed, whether a large amount is going to one contractor or whether it's going to be spread among different contractors. I'd be very well, that information would be very useful to this honorable House. But measures and this conversation will have to start, because any government will have to discuss with the population, even if it's for the future, what will have to happen with the contributions that the businesses make and that employers make to the NIC. That conversation must happen, because if it doesn't happen, we'll find ourselves in a similar situation with many other islands in the Caribbean as far as the NIC is concerned. And again, papers have been written, studies have been written on the viability of these NICs. And part of the answers that have been given, or some of the responses that have been recommended for the NICs, is an increase in the contribution rate over a period of time, an increase in the retirement age, and even in some drastic measures of stopping the payments of old age pensions for a few years to get the NIC back into viability. I'm saying these are some recommendations that have been made, lest I be wrongly quoted again. Some recommendations that have been made to ensure that the NIC remains viable after 2050. And if you want to challenge me, I can tell you where the negotiations came from. Because any time I come and I say anything in this honorable house, I say it based on fact that you want to find out? Yes. See you challenging me again? I'm not challenging you. I'm asking you who made the recommendation. How is that challenge? He wants the whole report for the MIF? The IMF? He can guide you. So, you copied the wrong page? Huh? All right. So, secondly, we talk about the liquidity in the system. A lot of that liquidity, Mr. Speaker, is due to the NIC funds being put into the banks. If you look at the investment trajectory of the banks, you will see a lot of these banks, NIC funds. So NIC is an important organization, very important. And the way we handle it, not this government, the way government handles the NIC is extremely important if we have to deal with the future of, not us, most of us will be dead, but the people who are paying their NIC now for the future. You have to be very careful how we manage it. Having said so, there is an issue in the banking system, Mr. Speaker, of non-performing loans. An issue that we have to deal with, but it will need you have to take some tough decisions as far as non-performing loans are concerned. So it's all right to be glib about confidence and glib and make all sorts of announcements without understanding that there is a future and the facts do not, and the history, the historical development in these countries, based on the same models that we are doing now. There are other Caribbean islands that if you go there, you'll see highway over highway over highway, highways all over the country, countries developing, highways, airports, and the state they are in now, because the growth was incurred by borrowing. So we can stay here and you can make all the glib announcements. But I don't want to mention any other country's name. But I'm warning, I'm saying, not warning, I'm just saying in my humble opinion, we have to be careful with all these grandiose projects, all that borrowing and hoping in the future, being over-optimistic when the reality does not say that. And if you go to some other Caribbean islands, you will see stretches of highway. If you visit these islands, you will not believe that these islands are in the fundamental fiscal mess they are today because of some of the very steps we are taking in Saint Lucia. We are borrowing excessively. We are biting slowly, directly and indirectly in the NIC. We are taking measures that are almost identical to what happened in the other islands and where these other islands are today. So I just want to sound a note of caution that whereas that $20 million is a drop in the ocean for the resources, for the money that the NIC has, it is not something we can take for granted, nor is it something we can be glib about and just go around and willy-nilly just borrow money, and hoping that we can win the next elections because we build a road. Other countries have gone that way, and if you look at them, you will see where they are. Every one of these countries has had to go to the IMF based on the same policy prescriptions that you are doing in St. Lucia. Talking about revenue stream, not understanding that the revenue stream, you have no control over it, because if something happens with the price of fuel, and I am sure, and I will make the figures available at some point, I'm sure that the government is not collecting the money it proposed to collect from the gas. I'm sure. And when the price of fuel goes up, we still have the same problems. So it's okay, we can stay here and boast and say all kinds of things. But the reality is that all these countries that took the same line that we took have ended up in serious fiscal problems. All of them. One of them, I don't want to mention, is in a complete mess today. But if you look at a country, you'll see highways, you'll see flyover bridges, you'll see roads, you'll see all kinds of things. But this country is in a serious fiscal problem. And I want to know what measures that this government is taking, these financial gurus, what measures they are taking to avoid the country from following in the footsteps that these other countries have fallen into. Same thing with the banks. You look and you see, in these other countries, they borrowed heavily from the banks. They borrowed heavily from the banks because the banks were liquid at the time, just as we're doing today in Saint Lucia. Because there's no confidence, so we're borrowing. They borrowed heavily from the banks. And these banks are taking measures now because most of them, and I'm not speaking about Saint Lucia today, I'm speaking about what's happening in the other islands. So whereas it is good for us to have political upmanship, it's good for us to play with the facts. The reality is we are going down a slippery slope, very slippery, and we may not slip this year or next year. But if we continue on the trajectory that we are going, with this heavy borrowing, this country will end up in serious problems like the other countries in the Caribbean region. So that's not your business, Kato.
Honorable members.
So I just want to warn. You can't join me, Chief. I did long enough. You can't put me off. So I just want to urge on the Minister of Finance to temper his enthusiasm and listen to some more solid advice than the advice of his chair bearers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.